Let's review. 1. What was the last German offensive? C. Battle of the Bulge. 2. Where did the Red Army begin to turn back the German army? A. Battle of Stalingrad. 3. Who were the French resistance? B. French civilians who were fighting German occupation. The War in the Pacific. Learning objective. Politics and law. Discuss the U.S.'s broad political reasons for entering World War II and how those motivations and wartime experiences informed post war policies and the Cold War. Lesson agenda. I do. Introduction. We do. Guided reading. War in the Pacific. You do. Check for understanding. For this lesson, you will need paper, pencil or pen, computer or mobile device, headphones. You may move at your own pace. Feel free to pause and rewind the video as you need. The text version of this assignment is available on the website. As we move through the lesson, consider this guiding question. How would you characterize the Pacific theater of war? Introduction. The entry of the United States into World War II placed the country and its armed forces into two theaters of war. While the United States focused on the defeat of Hitler and Mussolini in the European theater, the focus in the Pacific theater was to defeat the Japanese. The American plan to defeat Japan called for a two-pronged attack. The Pacific Fleet, commanded by Admiral Nimitz, would advance through the Central Pacific by hopping from one island to the next. This would allow troops to get closer and closer to Japan. Meanwhile, General MacArthur's troops would advance through the Solomon Islands, capture the north coast of New Guinea, and then launch an invasion to retake the Philippines. The Battle of Midway. At Pearl Harbor, the U.S. code-breaking team intercepted plans to attack Midway. With so many ships at sea, Japanese Admiral Yamamoto had transmitted the plans for Midway attack by radio, using the same code the Americans had already cracked. Seizing the opportunity to ambush the Japanese fleet, U.S. Admiral Nimitz ordered carriers to take up positions near Midway. When the Japanese launched their aircraft against Midway on June 4th, 1942, the Americans were ready. The Japanese ran into a blizzard of anti-aircraft fire, and 38 planes were shot down. As the Japanese prepared a second wave to attack Midway, aircraft from the American carriers Hornet, Yorktown, and Enterprise then launched a counterattack. The American planes caught the Japanese carriers with fuel, bombs, and aircraft exposed on their flight decks. Within minutes, three Japanese carriers were reduced to burning wrecks. A fourth was sunk a few hours later, and General Yamamoto ordered his remaining ships to retreat. The Battle of Midway was a turning point in the war. The Japanese Navy lost four large carriers, the heart of its fleet. Just 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the United States had stopped the Japanese advance. However, the victory was not without cost. The battle killed 362 Americans and 3,057 Japanese. Check for understanding. 1. Explain why the Battle of Midway could be considered the turning point in the battle against Japan. Island hopping in the Pacific. By the fall of 1943, the Navy was ready to launch its island hopping campaign, but the geography of the Central Pacific posed a problem. Many of the islands were coral reef atolls. The water over the coral reef was not always deep enough to allow landing craft to get to shore. If the landing craft ran aground on the reef, the troops would have to wade to the beach. As some 5,000 United States Marines learned at Tarawa Atoll, wading ashore could cause very high casualties. Tarawa, part of the Gilbert Islands, was the Navy's first objective. The Japanese base there had to be captured in order to put air bases in the nearby Marshall Islands. When the landing craft hit the reef, at least 20 ships ran aground. The Marines had to plunge into shoulder high water and wade several hundred yards to the beach. Raked by Japanese fire, only one Marine in three made it ashore. Once the Marines reached the beach, the battle was still far from over. Although many troops died wading ashore, one vehicle had been able to cross the reef and deliver its troops onto the beaches. The vehicle was a boat with tank tracks nicknamed the Alligator. This amphibious tractor, or Alligator Ampthrac, had been invented in the late 1930s to rescue people in Florida swamps. It had never been used in combat, and the Navy decided to buy only 200 of them in 1941. More than 1,000 Marines died on Tarawa. Photos of bodies lying crumpled next to burning landing craft shocked Americans back home. Many people began to wonder how many lives would be lost in defeating Japan. The next assault, Kwajalein Atoll in the Marshall Islands, went much more smoothly. This time, all of the troops went ashore in Amtrak's. Although the Japanese resisted fiercely, the Marines captured Kowalogan and nearby Inuiatok with far fewer casualties. After the Marshall Islands, the Navy targeted the Mariana Islands. American military planners wanted to use the Marianas as a base for a new heavy bomber, the B 29 Superfortress. The B 29 could fly farther than any other plane in the world. From airfields in the Marianas, B 29s could bomb Japan. Admiral Nimitz decided to invade three of the Mariana Islands: Saipan, Tainan, and Guam. Despite strong Japanese resistance, American troops captured all three by August 1944. A few months later, B 29s began bombing Japan. Check for understanding. 2. Briefly describe the two prongs of the United States battle plan in the Pacific. 3. In your own words, briefly describe the difficulties faced by American soldiers during the island hopping campaigns of 1943 to 1944. 4. Describe how the Amtrak or Alligator was able to reduce casualty rates in the Pacific. MacArthur returns. As the forces under Admiral Nimitz hopped across the Central Pacific, General Douglas MacArthur's troops began their own campaign in the Southwest Pacific. The campaign began by invading Guadalcanal and the Solomon Islands, east of New Guinea, in August 1942. It continued until early 1944, when MacArthur's troops finally captured enough islands to surround the main Japanese base in the region. In response, the Japanese withdrew their ships and aircraft from the base, although they left 100,000 troops behind to hold the island. Worried that the Navy's advance across the Central Pacific was leaving him behind, MacArthur ordered his troops to leap nearly 600 miles to capture the Japanese base at Hollandia on the north coast of New Guinea. Shortly after securing New Guinea, MacArthur's troops seized the island of Morotai, the last stop before the Philippines. To take back the Philippines, the United States assembled an enormous invasion force. In October 1944, over 700 ships carrying more than 160,000 troops sailed for Leyte Gulf in the Philippines. On October 20th, the troops began to land on Leyte, an island on the eastern side of the Philippines. A few hours after the invasion began, MacArthur headed to the beach. Upon reaching the shore, he strode to a radio and spoke into the microphone. People of the Philippines, I have returned. By the grace of Almighty God, our forces stand again on Philippine soil. To stop the American invasion, the Japanese sent 4 aircraft carriers towards the Philippines from the north and secretly dispatched another fleet from the west. Believing the Japanese carriers were leading the main attack, most of the American carriers protecting the invasion left Leyte Gulf and headed north to stop them. Seizing their chance, the Japanese warships to the west raced through the Philippine Islands to Leyte Gulf and ambushed the remaining American ships. The Battle of Leyte Gulf was the largest naval battle in history. It was also the first time that the Japanese used kamikaze attacks. Kamikaze means divine wind in Japanese. It refers to the great storm that destroyed the Mongol fleet during its invasion of Japan in the 13th century. Kamikaze pilots would deliberately crash their planes into American ships, killing themselves but also inflicting severe damage. Luckily for the Americans, just as their situation was becoming desperate, the Japanese commander, believing more American ships were on the way, ordered a retreat. Check for understanding. 5. Briefly describe the American efforts to retake the Philippine Islands from the Japanese. 6. Describe the Japanese kamikaze battle strategy. 7. Why do you think the Japanese began to rely on kamikaze attacks near the end of the war? The Battle of Iwo Jima. On November 24th, 1944, bombs fell on Tokyo. Above the city flew 80 B 29 Superfortress bombers that had traveled more than 1,500 miles from new American bases in the Mariana Islands. Many of their bombs missed the targets. By the time the B 29s reached Japan, they did not have enough fuel left to fix their navigational errors or to account for high winds. The pilots needed an island closer to Japan so the B 29s could refuel. American military planners chose Iwo Jima. Iwo Jima was perfectly located, roughly halfway between the Marianas and Japan, but its geography was formidable. It had a dormant volcano at its southern tip and rugged terrain with rocky cliffs, jagged ravines, and dozens of caves. Volcanic ash covered the ground. Even worse, the Japanese had built a vast network of concrete bunkers connected by miles of tunnels. On February 19th, 1945, some 60,000 Marines landed on Iwo Jima. As the troops leaped from the Amtracs, they sank up to their ankles in the soft ash and were pounded by Japanese artillery. The Marines crawled inland, attacking the Japanese bunkers with flamethrowers and explosives. More than 6,800 Marines were killed capturing the island. Admiral Nimitz later wrote on Iwo Jima, "Uncommon valor was a common virtue." Check for understanding. 8. Why was Iwo Jima targeted by the U.S.? 9. What obstacles did Iwo Jima present to U.S. forces? Lesson review. Answer the prompt below in 2 to 3 paragraphs. How would you characterize the Pacific theater of war? Homework. Add definitions for the topics from today's lesson to your learning objective review. Congratulations, scholar, you have reached the end of the lesson. Make sure your name, date, and class period are in the upper right hand corner of your paper. Turn your completed assignment into your class tray.